Good afternoon. I'm Daniel Kurtzer, faculty member of the school here, and very happy to introduce a longtime friend and colleague who was on a short visit to the United States, and we were able to attract him to Princeton. Efraim Inbar, the head of the Begin-Sadat Center at Bar-Ilan University and professor of government there. Efraim is one of Israel's foremost strategic thinkers, and has brought to us today a topic that is sure to elicit much interest. The title of the topic is The Rise and Demise of the Palestinian Option, which also is a way of telling you that I have found that this is a proof that friendship often will override philosophy. Efraim and I don't agree on much, and I'm not sure we're going to agree on the subject matter today, but he is a wonderful human being and a very well-reasoned thinker, and will certainly provoke our thinking about a topic of great importance both to Israel and to the United States, given our own interests in the region and in the success of the Middle East peace process. So I'm very proud to introduce Professor Efraim Inbar.
Thank you very much. The Arab-Israeli conflict is not a new conflict, as you probably know. It's 100 years, maybe more. So, and what I would like to point out that at certain times, at certain stages in the conflict, the Palestinian option is, or the Palestinian state, as we came to know, or how we speak about it today, was not always a politically relevant option. And if I start, until 47, the first stage, basically the Arab-Israeli or the Jewish-Arab conflict in Palestine was basically an intercommunal conflict between two communities, two ethnic communities, fighting over a piece of land, trying to establish their own political structures. And as the conflict between those two communities became more acute, the ruling power, the British Mandate, came up with an idea to divide the land between the two communities, which is not that different from what they've done in Ireland or the Indian subcontinent. And basically, it's also what the international relations, or part of the international relations theory, is telling us that this is somewhat stabilizing. Basically a divorce. People don't get along together. You live there, and put a big fence between you, and you live happily after. And this is what the British suggested already in 1937, the famous Peel Commission. And at that time, the Palestinian community, I'm not sure it was called the Palestinian community, but the Arabs in Israel rejected it. Another partition was suggested by the UN in 1947. And again, the Arabs in Palestine or in land of Israel, as well as their Arab friends in the Arab countries, rejected it. And in this period, which is primarily an intercommunal conflict, the Arab states were rather uninvolved or very little involved. And as a result of this conflict being an intercommunal conflict, it had special characteristics when it comes to the use of force. Communities don't have tanks, don't have airplanes, so despite of the violent conflict, the resulting casualties was limited. This changed, of course, in 47, when the UN partition was decided upon, and the Jews were better organized and implemented it. And as a result of what the Israelis call the Independence War or the 1948 war, we see a de facto partition. Basically, the Jews take part of the land. The local Arab community, the Palestinian community, is losing the war. And the Arab states that invaded the land of Israel take a part of it. The Jordanians take the West Bank, what's called, and the Egyptians take the Gaza Strip. and the Syrians take a piece of Palestine mandatory territory in the north. And this second stage, between 48 and 67, is basically interstate conflict. In this stage, the Palestinians played no role, or almost no role, and the main action was between Israel, a newly born state, and the Arab states surrounding it, which tried to restore the status quo ante, basically to destroy the Jewish state. During this period, the issue of having a Palestinian state was obviously not on the agenda, on the international agenda, and even the 242 United Nations resolution, which to some extent gave some kind of formal ending to the 67 war, related to the Palestinians, primarily the Palestinian refugees, primarily in humanitarian terms, rather than seeing them a political entity that deserves a state. A third stage in this conflict, since 67 to 1993, when the Oslo Agreement was agreed, it's a different type of interaction. Basically, we see what my colleague, Professor Sandler from Bar-Ilan University, says that it is a compound conflict. It has the interstate dimension as well as the inter-ethnic dimension, or intercommunal. Because after 67, the Palestinians in the West Bank and in Gaza became under Israeli rule, and in this stage, we see again the rise of the two-state paradigm, basically to try to bring about stability to this conflict by bringing about Palestinian rule in the areas in which there were a huge majority. Why did it happen? First of all, I think we see in this period clearly a decline of the interstate dimension. The main reason for the decline of the interstate dimension was basically the decision by Egypt, the most important Arab country, to defect from the Arab military coalition, or to disengage itself from this Arab-Israeli conflict. And we see already in November 77, Sadat coming to Jerusalem, in 78, September 78, the Camp David Accords, and afterwards, of course, in 79, March 79, the peace treaty between Israel and Egypt, which formalized the fact that Egypt was no longer a warring party against the Jewish state. Also, we see this type of decline in terms of use of force. Gradually, we see the decline of large-scale violence or conventional warfare. We have still a war in 70, a big war in 73, and afterwards, some kind of war, large-scale warfare in Lebanon, when the Israelis are facing primarily the military force of Syria, but not a full-scale war. And since 82, basically, there is no large-scale military war between Israel and its neighbors. And parallel to this decline is the interstate dimension. We see a greater importance to the ethnic dimension, or what we call, some people call, Palestinization of the conflict. First of all, we see a greater crystallization of the Palestinian identity, primarily because they were under Israeli occupation, and it's easier to look for yourself when you are vis-a-vis somebody else. Also, PLO, which was the main organ of the Palestinian national movement, receives international recognition primarily via terror. 74, it receives UN observer status, and interestingly, the Camp David Accords between Israel and Egypt of 78 link Gaza to the West Bank, leaving it as one unit to be run under some kind of autonomy arrangement, which was not agreed upon. But we see what Gaza and West Bank was separated for years. After Camp David, they are again into one political baggage. Also, we see in December 87 the first Palestinian uprising, which of course brought to the international attention the plight of the Palestinians. And this indeed underscores the fact that the Arab-Israeli conflict is no longer a military conflict with large-scale military confrontation, but is moving into more what we call the low-intensity conflict. It's a different type of use of force in which you don't use tanks, you don't use airplanes. It's a different type of military engagement. Also in Algiers, 88, the Palestinians finally accept the UN 47 partition. It took them 41 years. They keep up with realities. And this, of course, made the Palestinian National Movement a potential partner for an agreement with the Israelis. Parallel to those developments, we have also domestic political developments in Israel, basically an erosion over time of what the Israeli political jargon called a third state. There was clear opposition in Israeli political spectrum against what it was called then a third state. They even didn't say the forbidden word Palestinian, but this is what they meant, Rabin and others. Basically we see gradual substitution of what the Israelis preferred for years, a Jordanian option, basically to try to restore some kind of status quo ante, to bring the Hashemites, which look always nicer until this day probably than the Palestinians, more responsible. And I don't want to go into too much detail why it happened in the Israeli political scene, but this is what happened. And eventually Rabin, who was a main supporter of the Jordanian option, basically to try to reach an agreement with the Hashemites over the West Bank, was convinced. This is, of course, an interesting story, how he was convinced to agree to the Oslo Agreement, which was basically a bilateral agreement between the Palestinian National Movement and the Israeli Zionist movement, which its effect was a partition of the land of Israel. This time, a partition with the partner quite clear, a Palestinian National Movement who is supposed to take over the territories that Israelis are withdrawing from. And we see basically a territorialization of the Palestinian National Movement, many of their activists were in the diaspora, in Tunis, and they come in great numbers back to their homeland. This attempted partition and the building of a Palestinian state, in my book at least, finally failed in the attempt of the summer 2000, the Camp David, and whatever happened afterwards, and with the eruption of the campaign of violence since September 2000 against Israel, which the Palestinians call the Second Intifada. The cut-off date, I think it's really somewhat earlier, because some of the elements of the fifth stage, which I'll speak about, are already evident earlier. If I move to the fifth stage, basically the fifth stage after year 2000 is the failure of this paradigm, of the two-state solution paradigm. We see already, even earlier, the contours of a failed state, and the failed state has a clear definition when there is a political entity with no monopoly over use of force. The Weberian definition to a modern state is basically a political structure with monopoly over use of force. Arafat, for his own reasons, decided not to implement this basic requirement of a political modern structure, and we have no monopoly over use of force. We have militias, which eventually degenerates into what the Palestinians call fauda, disorder, and I think we see fragmentization of the Palestinian political structure institutions, a fragmentation of the political body among the Palestinians. We see a clear weakness of leadership, and which all this culminates, of course, in the Hamas takeover of Gaza in June 2007, which clearly shows that, there are at least two political Palestinian entities, one, partly ruled or largely ruled by Hamas, and one largely ruled by the PA, by Abu Mazen, which basically is ruling it because of the Israeli bayonets, because if he wouldn't, if the Israeli withdraw from the West Bank, the Hamas will take over that area as well. Basically, what we see in this fifth stage, that the two-state paradigm had two main assumptions, which simply don't work. One is that the Palestinian National Movement, given the opportunity to build a state, they will do it, and they didn't. And from a strategic Israeli point of view, Israel needs what's called in the Israeli political jargon a partner. We need somebody to be able to deter, to negotiate, somebody that will implement the agreement, and all this is lacking there. So this is the first assumption which didn't work, that was not realized. The second assumption was that the Palestinian National Movement is indeed ready for a historic compromise with the Zionists. And again, this seemed a very problematic assumption. When Arafat runs the education system in the Palestinian territories, it was far from educating for peace. It was far from educating for for good neighborly relations with the Jews. Basically, the role model is Shahid in many Palestinian books and many Palestinian education institutions. And recently, we have even learned that they are even objecting, Abu Mazen, the moderate, is objecting to the idea of having two states, one Jewish and one Palestinian. So I think this issue of moderation, this issue of acceptance at the normative level, a Jewish state next to him is still problematic. I think also the decline of the Palestinian option is a result of the decline of the attractiveness of the Palestinian political entity. Basically, and I speak to Palestinians, they are very frustrated, they're very disappointed with their own performance. And, just one example, one of their ministers has said to me, in private of course, that he's not sure that they deserve a state, because if they can't run it, also we see the rise of Hamas. Hamas is obviously not pushing the Palestinian into moderation, and Hamas in general is, of course, an Islamic movement which has a different type of political vision. I'm not sure they want a Palestinian state. They want some kind of structure which is more embracing other Muslims and the Ummah, the Muslim nation. So what are Israel's options? And I'm interested in policy. So what is, we know what happened. So what can we do about it? So one clear option is to try together with others, to build a Palestinian state. This is what basically the international community is doing. Tony Blair is being sent there, and money is collected, basically to try to bring about more maturity to the Palestinian political structures, more transparency, all those nice words, and to try to build a state that will be a bourgeois vision of the Western state. And I'm not sure that it will work for several reasons. First of all, I'm very skeptic about this whole, I might say colonialist. I don't have anything in colonialism. I know it's politically incorrect to say it, but outsiders to build a state in their own vision. This political engineering, we see, the great America is not very successful in building a democratic Iraq. So I don't think the this political engineering from outside has much chance in an area like the Middle East, and maybe in other areas. I'm not that familiar with other areas. Another fallacy which is being aired, is that Abu Mazen will be the agent for change. Abu Mazen, from what I understand, and I understand a little bit of political leaders, he's a very weak leader. He's, some people call it a hologram. He's not really there. He cannot rule, indeed, unfortunately, the Palestinians have not produced an Ataturk or a Ben-Gurion or this type of leaders that is sometimes ruthless, sometimes knows a very difficult thing, which is called state building. Generally, I think that the expectations that the Palestinians will soon have a state, like Western Europe, is very naive, because it took Europe hundreds of years to build a state. And I don't think that, the state building in general in the Middle East is not very successful, with the exception maybe of Egypt, which is a historic state. But all the others are new states which are grappling until this day with the notion of modernity, with what it is a state, and how do you grow citizens that are ready to do something for the state and not just to extract from it. A third fallacy is this economic aid. We all know where the money goes. It's very little filters down, and if the international community wants to grow, a very small number of Palestinians who are doing very well and rich, they are entitled to do it, but I don't think this will do any good to the Palestinian society in general. I have colleagues in the Palestinian Authority, academics, who have learned that the Europeans are very interested in building civil society in Palestine. Okay, what does it mean, civil society? NGOs, fine. Okay, so they establish 2 or 3 NGOs, draw very nice salary from the gullible Europeans, and they live well. They live much better than I do. But does it build civil society? I'm very skeptic. I think also that it will be very difficult to transform quickly the Palestinian society into a good neighbor of Israel. Initially there was a lot of complaint about the cold peace with the Egyptians. We call it cold peace. Why? We don't embrace each other, we don't kiss each other, we don't send our philharmonic orchestra to play in Cairo, they don't send their soccer team to play in Israel. They have very good soccer teams. They just won the African Cup. Because we were fighting each other for so many years. And people don't, after a fight for so many years, you don't get, together so easily. There are memories. So I think that expectation of good neighborly relations between Israelis and Palestinians after we killed each other for 100 years is not going to be achieved very easily. I think also, I'm afraid that the Palestinians, as well as, and this is to some extent the malaise of the Arab world, and I don't want to generalize, but there is lack of pragmatism in Arab political culture, which is reflected also among the Palestinians. I think that this issue of lack of central control is also not only Palestinian. It's much. Look at Somalia. Look at Lebanon. All those states failed to establish monopoly over use of force. Look at Iraq. After the Americans destroyed the center of powers, the dictatorial powers of Saddam Hussein, it's a mess, and I don't think we'll be able to rebuild easily this into a state. Finally, I think Hamas control of Gaza is something that will stay with us for a while. I don't think that this can be easily reversed, and basically we'll see Gaza going into its own direction. I don't know exactly what it's going to be, but it's definitely a different direction than the Palestinians in the West Bank. I think that many Israelis understand the futility of this paradigm, to build a state, but play along with it. If that's what the international community wants, if If Condi Rice wants Annapolis, okay, so the prime minister, okay, you will go to Annapolis, so you don't pay such a big price. You know, that's something you want, fine, we'll go along with it. But to some extent, for many Israelis, this is mainly a lip service to an idea which they tried, I think, seriously, and it failed. So what are the other options? First of all is to drop the two-state paradigm, and this needs some courage, which politicians usually don't have, and to adopt a different scheme, which is not very neat. Hamas takeover of Gaza is maybe a good opportunity to get rid of an unworkable plan, and maybe to let Gaza gravitate toward Egypt. I know that the Egyptians don't want Egypt. Nobody wants, no, they don't want Gaza. Who in his right mind wants Gaza? You know, it's a terrible place. And so they don't want Gaza. But will they have a choice if this will be a Hamastan? I think they are gradually moving into to have a greater role. It's not going to be necessarily a formal role, or, you know, informal agreements work very well sometimes. So this is probably one area of improvement could be. And I think also that there is a possibility of bringing back the Jordanians to the West Bank because basically they look much better than you know, the thugs of the various militias in Nablus or in Jenin or in those cities. Again, the Jordanians, for their own reasons, are not enamored, you know, with the Palestinians in the West Bank. They have plenty of them, too many of them in their belief on the East Bank. But if they'll have to face Katyushas or Qassams from the western part of the land of Israel, they may have a different attitude. Basically, Egypt and Jordan are more responsible states. They are Arabs. In my book, I think only Arabs can rule Arabs. I think that the Turks have done it successfully for a while, but there are no candidates, you know, to return the Ottoman Empire. There are many people in the Middle East that long for them, the Ottoman Empire. It was not such a bad arrangement. I think in Gaza they ruled with about a few hundred policemen, and now we have about 2 divisions around it. So the Ottomans have their merits, but they are not going to be back. I think that also the Palestinian national identity is still young, and it's still, you know, it can vary, it can shift. You know, as a Jew, you know, I have a long history. You know, I've seen people with different identities come and go. So what's a 30 years, 40 years identity? It's nothing under the sun. I think that Israel is generally is more inclined to move into that direction, which in Israeli parlance, it's called the regional approach. Basically, you know, for our own reason, we want to push some of the onus of responsibility for the Palestinians to the Arab states. It's not going to be a neat option, but I think, you know, informally maybe arrangements can be reached. A third option is basically conflict management. Again, to try to, not every conflict has a solution. You know, in life, there are situations in which you cannot solve all conflicts. What you can do is to lower the flames. What you can do is to try to minimize the suffering, to minimize the killing. This is something, you know, ambiguous, unclear, no real end goal. People, you know, particularly intellectuals, have difficulties with unclarities. But life is complex, and maybe this is one way to deal with a situation. I'll say just a few words about its components, and I'm basically in favor of this type of strategy. I think it's Israelis have to learn that they have to fight a war strategy rather than decisive wars. We have to learn that We cannot, Israelis are impatient, 6 days, we win, go home, that's it. No, it's no longer this type of situation with this, with the Palestinians, we need a war of attrition. Offensive, defensive measures, I think offensive are very important, and we are quite successful basically in containing the terror of the Palestinians. There has to be, of course, relentless pressure on the bad guys, including targeted killing, and once in a while a large-scale operation in order to destroy as much possible the terrorist capabilities. Basically, what I suggest is Israel should concentrate on the abilities of our enemies to hurt us rather than to build peace arrangements which are beyond the horizon. Of course, this type of strategy needs strategic coordination with the United States. We have here a former ambassador. He always received a lot of respect in Israel because we understand that between us and God is the United States. So that's it, Israelis. It's a small state. We know it. We understand it. Our use of force is always calibrated to the extent that the Americans are ready to tolerate it. This is a fact of life for Israelis, and we understand that. And this is an issue of dispute, by the way, in Israel. Where do you solve the conflict? Or where is the decisive area for making progress on the conflict? Is it in the Middle East or is it in Washington? As a conservative, I'm looking at Washington. And I always give good treatment to Dan Kertzer, not only because he was ambassador. He was also a nice guy. So, I think we need more public diplomacy. I think we have a good case. It's not always well expressed. I think we can clearly make the case that we are the bad guys fighting the bad guys. To put it, very bluntly, I think Israel can regain the moral ground in this conflict, which is important to us, because Israelis are sensitive to how we look, to what, maybe it's not necessarily to be that sensitive, but we are. And this brings me to the last point, which is the home front. In order to fight this type of war, a long war for many more years, we need social cohesion. For protracted conflict, we have to prove to ourselves always that we don't miss opportunities for peace. And this is why I'm ready to see the Israeli government go to Annapolis and go and talk to those, for hours, for weeks, for years, because I am skeptic, but at the same time, I know that we have to try everything. And it's important for us. In the near future, and this, I'll finish the 35 minutes which I was allotted. I think that in the near future, this is a most pragmatic approach, and this is basically what will happen. I think we'll see not agreements, and if we see agreements, of course, they will not be implemented, but we'll see this type of attempt by the Israelis and also by the international community. I think there is much greater pragmatism and understanding of what really is at stake in Europe and of course in other places of the world, that this is what has to be done. Basically to try to manage the conflict and to limit the suffering of both sides. Thank you.
If only Professor Inbar had said anything controversial that everybody say. Let me start out, and then we'll have a period of questions and answers. I want to start out with a question, which is, in the Middle East, people often say that things are either dead or dead and buried. And you have essentially consigned the two-state solution to being dead. But is it dead and buried? Is there a possibility that better behavior, and I'll use your phraseology, that success of the Blair mission, that Palestinian seriousness in internal reform can revive an option which, for Palestinians, is the only option. They don't see long-term conflict management as an option. They want an independent state as a platform off which to operate. So is the two-state solution dead, or is it dead and buried?
Well, I come from the land of prophets, but prophecy, is given to fools. I don't know. I think that basically it's open-ended history. I think that if this miracle will happen and all what you mentioned will indeed happen, the Israelis don't have anything against, in principle, a Palestinian state. The Israelis are ready for partition. There's a territory which is, we don't want to be there because there are Palestinians, Arabs there. We want somebody to rule over this area. If the Palestinians are able to portray themselves as reliable rulers, I think the idea can be revived. There is nothing in it. Israelis are very pragmatic, basically. So, and there is this issue of greater Israel is no longer politically potent. How many politicians in Knesset, are thinking about the greater Israel, which means, that Israel should rule over all of land of Israel, or the western part of the land of Israel. So we are looking for a partner. If the Egyptians will do it for us, fine. If the Palestinians finally produce, a leader that is a Palestinian Ataturk, fine. I'm not sure this will happen, but I think that it is a possibility that we do not reject.
Questions?
In 1948, the Egyptians were in Gaza as a bastion against Israel. They didn't annex Gaza. Jordanians annexed the West Bank. They even gave the Palestinian citizenship. And that ended up September 70, the Black September. What makes you think that at this stage of the game, why would Egypt, for example, take an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood and add them to the problems they have in Egypt? Or the Jordanians, which will make them a minority in their own state?
It's very tempting for the Egyptians and for the Jordanians to push this hot potato to the Israelis. This is what they've done, basically. About the Egyptians, there is difference between the Egyptians and the Jordanians. The Egyptians, I do not expect them to annex Gaza. Egyptians have their own ways to rule informally, if they want to. They are facing a serious dilemma. If a Muslim Brotherhood regime is next door, or they will do something about it. So far, it's not clear what the Egyptian decision is. By the way, I think that Israelis will be ready to tolerate low flames from Gaza. We do not expect the Egyptians to fully eradicate terrorism from Gaza. I think Israel is ready, in a tacit agreement with the Egyptians, to say, okay, a few attacks, we can manage, but no more. If the Egyptians deliver, it's a great success. I think the Palestinians, also the Egyptians, cannot afford not to show solidarity with the Palestinians. This is what Hamas is exploiting, basically. I read the newspapers, Gaza is an Israeli jail, yes? But people forget that the Egyptians are also there. So the Egyptians allowed them in. They cannot ignore and establish again this big wall and not allow anything. I think that they will inevitably be drawn into. I may be wrong, but if not, they'll have a bigger problem. Having a Hamas state whose links in Sinai to Al-Qaeda, they may lose the Sinai. I run it all.
Okay, under your ideas concerning conflict management, do you foresee the West Bank security wall that Israel is building eventually covering all of its borders, both with Gaza and the West Bank?
Yes. I think that the Israelis want the fence. They want to be on this side, the Palestinians on the other side. We now will probably build a fence along the Egyptian border. Yes. That's part of the Israeli decision to disengage itself from the territories. And the fence, I'm skeptic, about the fence. The fence is not necessarily very effective. I think the IDF now realizes it, and this is why there is less money going into the fence to build it in the southern, the Hebron area. But the fence is more a psychological, expression of the Israelis. You are there, beyond the fence. I don't want to see you. It's, Israelis are afraid of Palestinians. Israelis don't want to open their labor market to Palestinians. We bring, Chinese, Thais, it's a social problems, but still we prefer them to the Palestinians. Yeah, it will be a fence.
Is there a solution to the Qassam violence?
In short, no. There is, now they're working on the Iron Dome. I don't want to, to burn you with the details. But basically, it's going to be a very expensive system in which you shoot thousands of dollars of equipment at 200 piece of missile. So I'm not sure this is the best proposition. This is why I think that we should go the attack to try to get the infrastructure, to demolish it, and after a few years or less, depends, to go back. This is what we are doing in Gaza, in the West Bank. We went there in 2002, March, April 2002. It was a big operation. And from there, the important news are every day, the IDF went in, picked up a few bad guys, brought them to the Israeli jails. They get good treatment, they study, but they do less damage there than in the West Bank. It's like a zipper. We go in, go out. And of course, this unclear situation makes it easier for this type of operation. If the Jordanians will be there, it will be more difficult. But I think we are ready to pay the price.
I think you make the case about Egypt not wanting Gaza back and not wanting to be involved with the professor because of the ramifications for his own internal situation. And you also made the case that negotiations between Israel and Hamas are probably not going to go very far. That leaves the issue of the division between the West Bank and Gaza. Wouldn't over time be in Palestinians' interest to reconcile between Fatah and Hamas, to bring a reconciliation, to possibly lead to some sort of new formulation that leads to an entity or an agreement where Hamas stand on the sidelines in some sort of government that plays a lower profile role, and maybe in that case lead to some sort of quiet on the ground, maybe engendering some sort of negotiation down the road under a more unified Palestinian arrangement instead of the current division that's taking place.
From a Palestinian point of view, you are correct. But it's not going to happen because Hamas wants to have control. They are not going. Basically, they feel cheated by the Fatah. They won the elections. Afterwards, the Americans, the Saudis, everybody is mingling, and it's undermining the regime. The international community is not cooperating with them, is ostracizing them. So, and they want to, if you are a prime minister, you want to stay prime minister. Look at like Colmer, you are not willing to give it up. So I think the political dynamics are such that will not bring to closer cooperation between the West Bank and Gaza. And this, by the way, serves the Israeli interest. It weakens them, and corridors are a problem. It's terrible. If you start talking about corridor, international corridor, it never worked. So
you address the realistic, whether it's realistic, the concept that seems to be taken for granted that the objective is a state for the Palestinian people, and that this is the objective, and there seems to be such a weight of evidence that that's not the objective, or at least for Hamas, at least for Fatah. Both of them have embedded in their identity documents, their charters, the total destruction of the state of Israel as the objective, not the formation of a state. And also, in the light of another perspective, if you sort of back away and look a little bit historically, the bigger picture, the original Palestinian mandate that Britain had essentially did carve out a Palestinian state, and it's now called the State of Jordan, which has a Palestinian majority population. Now, it's not being governed by the Palestinian majority, but lots of states in the world are not being governed equally by all of their factions. But why is Israel not opening up these questions, or could you comment on those questions?
I think basically we see what we call in Israel the demographic problem. We don't want to rule over foreigners. We are forced to do it. We don't want to rule over Palestinians. And since the Palestinians have been, in the recent years, a majority in certain areas, we don't want to be there. Simple. This demographic rationale is compelling even the right wing in Israel. So, as a Zionist, maybe I feel very disappointed that the Jewish diaspora didn't come in great numbers in order to change the demographic situation in Palestine. Okay, so what? But there are facts on the ground. But I must say that the longer the conflict continues, I think time is on Israel's side. And they'll get less and less.
Trying to cover the whole geography.
Some have argued that Israel should go into Gaza, should force Hamas out, through military means, and then seek out, local leaders to rule, as minorities, not have, one big government, and have normal, small minorities, and kind of support them in the same way Israel supports the government in the West Bank. So, with the idea of support some kind of a rule in Gaza, is that possible? I mean, considering Gaza is not that large of an area.
I would advise my government not to try to encourage this side or the other side. We tried this type of political engineering among the Palestinians by Ariel Sharon in the 80s. We tried to political engineer the situation in Lebanon, and I think we are not very good at this type of things, and we should stay away from it. Gaza cannot be... Anything in Gaza cannot be solved by Israelis. Basically, the future of the Gazans, the future of the West Bankers, the future of the Jordanians is going to be decided by themselves. Very little outside intervention can be helpful. So I am in favor of trying to clean Gaza in order to make it easier for the Egyptians to get in. But I don't think that we can select certain people and say, okay, you will be the rulers. It doesn't work.
Do the Israelis you interact with have any viewpoint about the upcoming American elections? And if so, what is their view?
We follow avidly American politics, NBA, everything that is America. I don't think there are many countries in the world that are so much interested in America. And American politics, of course, a presidential election is very important to Israel because, we have a very focused prism. Is it good for the Jews? Is it bad for the Jews? And so this is a question we usually ask ourselves. And we are fascinated by American politics.
Any particular viewpoints expressed?
I think there is some. I don't want to interfere in politics here. You are a wonderful democratic state. I think there is. Obama is less. How should I say it? He's more suspected of not being one of us, or he doesn't have this type of record that other American politicians have. Maybe he doesn't have this type of rapprochement with pro-Israeli organizations. But basically, to be honest, I think that American support for Israel is bipartisan, and I don't think there'll be much difference what president will be, in my view. Because I don't think that American presidents can do much good in the Middle East. So they are limited in what they can do. So they can, by the way, if they pressure us, we can call elections. And, we are very good at going elections. We are busy with elections. Forget about it. Peace.
Can you comment on the impact of Israeli settlements on the process you're talking about?
I'm an advocate of partition, and I've always advocated selective settlement in those areas which are important to Israel in terms of security, like the area around Jerusalem, the area along the Jordan Valley, Alon Plan, if you know it. So with this type of outlook, I think that many settlements are a waste of Israeli effort and money. But I must say that there's been an incentive for the Palestinians to negotiate, because they see, if this continues, we may not be left with much. So I think usually to view settlements an obstacle for peace is the wrong attitude, particularly since we proved already that the Israeli political system is capable of removing settlements. We've done it in Sinai, in the framework of the peace process with Egypt. We've done it unilaterally in Gaza. And I also must say that, I don't accept the Palestinian demand for a Judenrein state. I think that if we have 1 million Palestinians in Israel, why can't Palestinians, if a state is established, have a small minority of Jews? So if they want to stay there, I wouldn't stay, but if they want to stay because they believe, the holiness of the land is such great that, I fulfill myself religiously by living in this particular place, and they are willing to be Palestinian citizens, I think they should be allowed to. But this is a minor issue. I really don't think the settlement is a blown out of proportion issue, because the Israelis, as soon as they delineate a border, they'll do their best to bring their citizens on the eastern side, or whatever side of the border.
What about the position of Iran in this?
Iran is a problem, of course. Iran is encouraging the radicals and Hezbollah in the north, and has good relations with funds Hamas and Islamic Jihad. Apart from that, Ahmadinejad is our great friend, and he doesn't hesitate to say things which were unheard for many decades. And I must say that Israelis are very concerned, not only about what he says because we believe him, but also because of the international reaction. A very reputable university in this country, of the style of Princeton, accepted, him for a talk. I think, this is intolerable, but, of course, I'm not on the board of that university. I think that what is happening in Europe, not even one country has lowered the diplomatic relations with Iran for demanding the demise of a state, of a member of the United Nations. So I think the type of reaction Iran gets is, the evoked set. I know some people in IR know. We are afraid. It's not the first time we hear this type of things, and we see nobody moves a finger.
Thanks. You mentioned that the Palestinian option, you actually said it's died, not necessarily buried, but died in 2000 after the Second Intifada actually erupted. And my question is, do you really think it was ever a viable option except in the minds of the international community? And what I mean is, in terms of incentives, when we talk about strategic interests of the countries in the region, why would Jordan, except for domestic interests, they have to support their Arab population, why would they advocate another state that might destabilize the Hashemite rule when they have 70% Palestinians? Why would Egypt advocate such a state? So paradoxically speaking, probably only Israel had the biggest interest to get rid of the Palestinians. So it was never really a viable option. And the second part, can you comment on whether the Oslo process actually radicalized, in fact, the Palestinians and worked precisely the other way than whoever planned it intended?
I think that there is a difference between Egyptians and Jordanians. The Jordanians obviously don't want a Palestinian state. The Egyptians have somewhat a different interest. I think that they have some interest in bleeding Israel, and this is why they tolerated what's happening in Gaza, the flow of arms. They see Israel as a rival, a regional rival. Basically, the perspective on international politics in the Middle East is a balance of power. In a liberal place like Princeton, it's not always accepted, but this is how people in the Middle East look at international relations. It's a balance of power, realpolitik. I think that there was a chance because the Palestinians were given a chance. There are people that, given a chance, grab the opportunity and establish a state. They are not the only ones that failed. The Kurds, for example, also is another group that has failed because of fragmentation, failed to establish a state. The Palestinians had a great opportunity. Israelis put it themselves as the best fundraiser, Shimon Peres. And, there are not better fundraisers, and a lot of money went into this enterprise. And it didn't work. I think maybe with a different type of leadership, it could have worked. From an Israeli point of view, it's a pity that it didn't work. We would have loved to have there. We have no illusions that a democratic state. We would settle for a benign, enlightened dictator there. That's all right with us. But somebody that you can deal with, and somebody that will not be as greedy as many Arab leaders are. But it didn't happen. I think there was a real opportunity. Oslo radicalized? Yes, of course, because without Israeli control, we see Hamas, we see also the militarization of the Palestinian society. It's one of the most militarized societies in the world. Everyone has a gun. And in the Middle East, guns are part of your virility. You are a man. You are a gun. So it's a pity that it happened, but and this is why I think that it's not going to work anytime soon. And maybe, what you say, but it's a big maybe.
I wanted to ask you about the Israeli Arabs. You said only Arabs can rule Arabs, but there is a significant population of Palestinians living inside Israel, the Israeli Arabs. How do they factor into your prognosis for the future?
I think the Israeli Arabs are have two choices. One, it's basically, it's the belly and your heart. The heart is probably with the Palestinian struggle. But the more rational part of their body tells them, listen, in Israel it's better, we should live here and we should try to be citizens under, not optional, not the best conditions in the world. I think Israel should try to nourish this type of attitude. We should try to minimize as much as possible discrimination if there is. Formal discrimination is almost inexistent. But we should really try to make them part of our society. I think that their leadership is also very bad. And their leadership is radical. I think that there are polls showing that there was an idea of al-Fahim. I don't know if you know, there is a village next to the Green Line that Labour Party suggested that in the framework of some kind of Israeli-Palestinian deal, this village will become part of the Palestinian state. Israel will get rid part of the Arab population, and there will be they will stay in the same place. Will just withdraw the land. And of course, there are uproar in al-Fahim. They don't want to be in Palestine. We see what's happening now in Jerusalem. In Jerusalem, we build the fence. And Palestinians want to be on the Israeli side of the fence for clear reasons. Basically, on our side, it's we live in a first world country, if we may say so. $20,000 GMP per capita, good medical services, telephone system is working, policemen don't harass. Somebody doesn't like what I say. So, and not far from there, it's Arafat state. Okay. Well.